Welcome back to another podcast episode where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. This week, we're going to be reviewing Flatiron, another coding bootcamp, pretty highly rated as well. So I kind of want to dive into what the experience is like. So I invited 3 graduates on, and they're going to go ahead and share their experience, honest experience, and I'm really excited to hear it. Sarah, we'll go ahead and start with you. Would you like to do a little intro, tell people about yourself?
Yeah. I'm Sarah LaLogia. I decided to learn coding as a midlife career change. And I was at Flatiron from last October until January, just in time for the world to fall apart. And I'm about to start my first developer job at the National Democratic Training Committee.
Congrats on the new position, by the way. That's exciting. All right, I'll actually give a quick intro. I'm just going to go left to right on my screen. So I was a UI engineer. I actually got a developer position about 3 years ago, and I actually spent about 2 years trying to get my first developer job. But I was a UI engineer at a healthcare company, and then software engineer at a tech ed company, and a full stack engineer at kind of like a business automation company, and loved all 3 positions. And I finally got the opportunity to start my own business and kind of create my own projects, put pricing models around them. So that's what I'm doing. That's kind of what I love about development. But yeah, that's me. How about you, Andrea?
So I have a pretty big mix of backgrounds. I actually was, I have 2 degrees in fine art. And then I was going to pursue medical illustration and kind of hit a snag there and decided I still wanted to, for a while, I still wanted to get into the healthcare field. Especially like I was a bartender for a while, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to go into software engineering because that way I can have, kind of an impact on whatever field I decide to eventually go into. So
I like that idea, that perspective with it. Uh, Andrea, would you see if you could find a way to boost your mic a little bit? You're a little bit soft.
it might be,
Kind of like muffled. Am I hearing the same thing?
um,
No worries. Take your time with it. No rush. Dominique, would you like to do a little intro? Tell us about yourself while we're waiting.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dominique Scaff. I'm 19. Um, I did one semester of university, and then I decided that I wanted to go a different path. So that's when someone close to me told me about coding boot camps, and I was always into tech and stuff like that. So it just kind of made sense for me for that to be my next step. So that's exactly what I did, and I went through the online course with Flatiron. So I'm different in that way.
Okay, so you took the online course. Did you two take the in-person immersive?
Yeah, we were both at the Chicago campus.
Oh, okay. From Chicago. Very cool.
We even overlapped a little bit, actually. Can you hear me okay now, by the way?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I was like, you look really familiar.
Did you
I'm
guys
sure
get
we
a
sat
chance?
like 10 feet apart, but probably never talked because we were both like, oh my God, I
Yeah.
have so much to do.
Andrea came in right about the time we were starting, my cohort was starting our capstone projects, or like our, maybe not the capstone, but the second to last project. And so we were deep in it at that point.
Dang. Okay. It sounds like a real coding bootcamp experience, though. For sure. So did you guys have like, actually we're going to dive into like the structure of it since you guys overlapped. Okay, so we have 2 in person, 1 remote. I love hearing about the different types because I think some boot camps can really offer a very, very different experience with both. And I like to see how kind of closely intertwined it is. But what was the application process like when you guys were trying to get in?
I can start. Honestly, it seems like it was so long ago, so I'm probably not going to remember everything, but I know, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the first thing was kind of, well, I did the pre-work or not the pre-work, the boot camp prep, and then had the cultural interview and then the technical interview. And then after that, you start the pre-work. But for I tend to have really bad test anxiety, so I absolutely bombed my technical, like bombed it. Even though I knew, like right after I got off the phone, I was like, I know exactly how to solve this, and so I solved it and like sent it to them and everything. They're like, yeah, but it didn't happen over the phone. So they actually had, I don't know if they had this when you guys were doing it, but they had this thing called the Fast Track Weekend, where it was kind of like an in-person mini course where you went over the stuff that you learned in the bootcamp prep, and then they quizzed you there. And for some reason, I was much more confident when I was in person with people and getting to collaborate a bit more. So that was my application process, which I think is not really the traditional one.
Okay, so you had pre-work. It wasn't the pre-course work for the program itself. It was just to prepare you for the application process.
Yeah, there were kind of two rounds
Okay.
of pre-work. So there's the boot camp prep, which is a series of, short lessons and labs that leads up to a slightly bigger lab that they use as the technical interview. So like once you get to this point, they're like, okay, you're ready to apply. You apply and do your cultural interview. And then once you're done with that one big lab, that you code review that as the technical. And then they throw some more stuff at you, like, okay, well, what if we wanted to take this and add this thing to it? How would you do that?
Okay, that makes sense. So is the bootcamp prep kind of like a paid pre-course?
No, it was free.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was all free, which was great because that was what I used as a sort of, does this seem like something I want to do? It's a great introduction. And I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Is that pretty much everyone's experience? Does that sound pretty familiar? Okay. All right. So that's interesting that you split it up between the cultural and technical, because I think a lot of boot camps will combine both. And it's really just like, I think a lot of coding boot camps, they do it where they just want to see if they want to code with you, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how do they get along with you, and how do you solve the process? Do you get frustrated because you can't solve it? Like, how do you handle those types of situations? That's interesting that they split it up. Okay, yeah. Cool. So what about the curriculum? What do you guys think about that? This is a bigger topic.
It is. It's such a huge topic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a complex topic. The one thing I really appreciate about Flatiron's curriculum is that it's very flexible. They take feedback all the time. Every lab you do, both in the pre-work and once you get into the actual program, has a feedback link.
Okay.
So if you spot something that either is an error or just you didn't think was explained very well, you can give them that feedback immediately, and they do respond to it very quickly. So I know that there were a couple of labs early in the program that my cohort was like, we don't understand what to do with this. We don't feel like this was explained well. Maybe it's out of order. And we sent that feedback in. And by the time the next cohort started, they had adjusted those labs. Wow. So I really like that they do that. The downside of that is that sometimes I think those changes are pushed before they've fully been evaluated.
Really?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, because we just know that, like, when I was there, they were completely retooling how they taught React.
Okay.
And the first chunk of React labs really felt like they were out of order. Like, there were concepts being thrown into the lab before they had been explained at all, in such a way that in some cases we didn't even know what questions to ask because these concepts were so unfamiliar. And again, we left feedback. I trust that those have since been improved, because I really do think they just pushed them out of order. I think if you put that lab here, it makes a lot more sense. But for the most part, I think their curriculum is well structured in a progressive way, where concepts really do lead to the next thing. in a way that is intuitive and makes sense.
Okay, so when you mentioned that the labs are a little out of order,
Only sometimes.
okay. So
Yeah,
overall, like it kind
that
of,
was not a common thing. It just
okay,
happened a couple of times, and to me, I thought was a sign of like just they made some changes to how they're teaching this one topic, and maybe the review process wasn't thorough enough
okay.
when they put the new stuff up.
So who reviews the content? Do you guys know?
I know they have a whole curriculum committee that
Okay.
does all of that because one
Okay.
of my cohort mates who started the cohort with me was in touch and like in communication with the curriculum committee talking about some of the issues we had and how to fix them.
What can you give me an example of something that got pushed too fast into the
I
next?
wish I could remember the specifics.
Okay.
It wasn't anything big. It really was just we're going through, I really remember it being in the React section. And I think it was when we were trying to learn management of state in React.
Okay.
And there was some concept that was needed to solve a lab. And literally the next lab was the README introduction of that concept.
Huh.
I was like, no, you just needed to swap those.
Just
It was
reverse
there. You were giving us that information. You just hadn't given it to us yet.
it. Okay. All right. Interesting. How about you, Andrea, and is it Dominique or Dominique?
Dominique.
Dominique. Okay. What do you guys think of it?
Um, I had mixed feelings. I feel like sometimes it felt like you were kind of just being thrown into the wolves and you just had to figure it out on your own. And sometimes you felt really well prepared. But sometimes you were well prepared in one thing that didn't connect to another thing that you needed to be also well prepared in. So it was a lot of like, oh, this is so easy. I get this completely. And then a lot of like, I don't know anything. I don't know what I'm doing.
I agree with that.
Interesting.
I think that feeling, though, can be really valuable. And what I wish they'd do with it is just let you know that that's what they're doing. That, like, no, you're not supposed to know this yet. We want you to reach out and kind of do a little research on your own and try to figure it out before we explain it. Because I think that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But when they don't tell you that's what they're doing, I know I at one point spent an hour going back through the previous material trying to find where they explained this thing that they hadn't explained yet.
And that's a real common thought process of like, if you are falling behind or you feel like you're falling behind, you often, like one of the first questions people ask themselves is it because of me, right? Did I miss material? Like where should I stand in comparison to other people in my class? Because I love the concept of kind of throwing you in the water with you understanding that you're supposed to try to swim, that you are supposed to try to figure it out and build that skill and that confidence in yourself in doing so. It's a really
I do think that's what it is because Flatiron is very big on what they say a lot is that they aren't teaching you how to program, they're teaching you how to learn and how to think like a programmer. So that rather than throwing a ton of material at you, which there's still a lot of material, don't get me wrong. But rather than throw a bunch of different languages at you, it really is trying to get you used to attacking problems methodically.
okay.
I just wish they'd be a little clearer about it sometimes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Maybe they changed that a little bit because, yeah, I graduated just a few months after you. And I do remember going into, I think it was mod 3 or 4, one of the last few mods. I remember one of the instructors being like, we're going to do this on purpose. We're going to not initially answer your questions or try to avoid answering their questions so that you can kind of figure stuff out on your own. And they're like, try to have your own kind of like benchmarks of like when, like, you know, if you've spent 20 minutes staring at the screen and not coding anything, then you need to come to us and ask questions. And honestly, like, we'll probably get to this later, but honestly, it was probably the most annoying and most helpful thing for me eventually. Like, I hated every second of it when I couldn't get an answer right. And I'm like, why won't someone just help me? But in my internship and now in my job, I worked for startups both times, and there are problems that you just can't go to anyone for because nobody has that much time, or it's something that only you have looked at or touched, and you know, you don't necessarily have all of the resources that you would want to have all of the time. So it's like you were saying, like teaching you how to learn things. And I remember Duke always saying, like, get comfortable being uncomfortable or whatever. Wasn't that one of his famous
One of the
lines?
Dukeisms.
I like that.
Yeah.
I really like that. I say that all the time. I love that phrase. Okay.
Yeah, I feel like as a developer, but especially as like a bootcamp student in general, like that's a thing that you have to get really good at, is not knowing and finding out how to look it up, or knowing what language to use is really important when you're doing a Google search, etc. So
do you guys think that's the cure for imposter syndrome, is just to get comfortable not knowing everything?
I don't think it's a cure, but I think it helps with management.
Okay.
It is all you can do. You can't cure imposter syndrome. All you can do is manage it.
right.
I
Like
agree
that.
with you. Okay, I like that. So what was it split, like maybe like the first half you learned a lot of the fundamentals, second half you worked on projects, or was it split up like that in any way?
It was split into modules.
Okay.
And so with each module, you would start out with the fundamentals for that topic. And then basically it's structured around Ruby and React, or Ruby and JavaScript, really. And so you come in and you start with the basics of Ruby, and you do a couple of weeks just on kind of fundamentals and concepts and labs. And then you do a code challenge.
Sorry. Just fixing my focus.
I didn't know if that was stop now.
No. You know how you like check yourself in the camera? You'll see me doing stuff like that. So
No.
that's my version of it.
So you do a code challenge. You then do a code review for what you wrote during the code challenge. And then is project week, so that you can apply whatever it is you just learned. And so you do the modules you do the kind of vanilla version of the language. Mm-hmm. And then usually the next module is some sort of framework. So we did a like just Ruby fundamentals module and did a command line app using Ruby. And then we did Sinatra, which that might actually be the one big complaint I had about the curriculum. I found Sinatra only frustrating and completely useless for everything else we did. And I wish they'd replace it with more fundamental work. I think that would be more useful there than Sinatra. I did give them that feedback, so I'm hopeful that they'll consider it. But then went into Rails, so that it was very much like all the things you found frustrating, a lot of the things you found frustrating about Ruby are a little smoother now because Rails will take care of them for you. Mm-hmm. And then you did a big kind of full stack Rails app with a team.
Okay.
It's a very similar process going through JavaScript, where there's a module of vanilla JavaScript fundamentals. You do a full JavaScript front end app with a Rails back end. And then we did the same thing for React.
So did you feel like it was easy to swap between the two languages and pick those up in the same coding bootcamp?
I mean, none of it's easy. I do think it's integrated well. I think it's a limited integration. that the way they integrate it is that you're going to continue, again, you're going to continue using Rails as your backend once you start JavaScript there, almost exclusively as an API only build, which isn't going to make sense to people who haven't started coding yet, but they teach you one way of using Rails as your backend provider, and then building the JavaScript as the front end. And it works fine. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great thing to know. And again, learning how those two things interact is very valuable, and I think is done well. I do wish there was a little bit more about other ways of incorporating the backend. Like, it doesn't always have to be an API, an external API that you're fetching from. I have now worked with a couple of open source apps that just do it differently. And so it would have been nice to get a little bit more about kind of what the different ways are that structure is used in the industry. But
Okay.
what they do well.
Interesting. Okay. So the chunk of JavaScript that you learned, was that mainly on the front end?
Mostly.
Okay.
At least for me. I don't know what they're doing with the remote. So
It's the same.
yeah.
Okay. I'm going to challenge that a bit, because you gave me really, really helpful context, and I love that they integrated it well, because it's a really tough thing to do. But I don't know if you guys know, I host a meetup. I've helped over 1,000 members that have come through. And one thing, like a lot of people that come through with coding boot camps, the main thing that they struggle with is usually if their attention was split in this condensed time between two different languages, two different ecosystems, two different frameworks. And it's a really hard thing to integrate. Do you feel like it was good that they taught you two different languages and that they did integrate well? Andrea, Dominique, I'm kind of curious what your opinions are.
I do think it's valuable that they teach you more than one language, because Ruby is mostly for back end and JavaScript is mostly for front end. So they're teaching you full stack development. So it's good that you have those two. But to do it in a way that's two different languages, it sort of prepares you for languages you might learn in the future, and different syntax and things to look out for. So I think it's a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. I think that, again, it kind of goes along with the get comfortable being uncomfortable kind of thing, because it's like, as soon as you're like, oh, okay, Ruby makes a little bit of sense, they're like, here's JavaScript, and you're like, my God, what do I do with this? But it's nice because it has made me go into jobs being like, okay, well, I'm going to tackle this other thing that I don't know, because, I've gotten used to being able, I have the tools to know, this might sound weird, but I have the tools to be able to know how to look stuff up now. I know how to use certain words in certain ways that get me really specific answers and get me exactly what I need. So it's like, picking up new languages and new text doesn't scare me, because I know kind of a big range of things. Plus, like, as an entry-level dev, having two languages on your resume is great. And you don't, you're not going to learn everything through a boot camp. So I feel like one nice thing about learning two different languages with, at least two different frameworks, you have a lot of different like perspectives, and you have like a good foundation of each of them, enough to like be able to continue learning those things or learning other languages if you want to. So yeah. I think that's valuable.
So it sounds like everyone thinks that it was very valuable, and overall it sounds like the integration went really well, which is important, and that's what's going to make that work. Did they teach CSS and go into depth with that as much as they did with JavaScript to get you more comfortable with the front end?
No. CSS.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say they had a little bit of it in the pre-work, but just enough to be like, okay, I know what this is,
Okay.
Our cohort, we had a little bit of CSS work very early, mostly when we were just doing the HTML fundamentals. and we had one or two optional CSS lectures, primarily because we asked for them. And so one of the coaches actually did do a kind of short CSS workshop that you could attend if you wanted to. And we were also encouraged to use, and in some cases required to use, like CSS libraries, which was helpful for being able to make projects look nice really quickly. But was something, when I finished, one of the first things I wanted to do was go dig more into fully custom CSS. So that's something I do think they could do a little bit more with.
Okay.
Yeah, I would take that time away from Sinatra and do a little bit more of CSS and maybe a little bit more React.
More testing.
Yeah.
See, testing in my coding bootcamp got tossed out.
Yeah, that's what I hear from almost everyone. Yeah. And I think it's so valuable. I have learned so much since I left from learning how to write tests. And they do put a lot of emphasis on test-driven development as a development strategy. And there are a lot of labs that you do where they're like, we're not giving you instructions, run the tests and develop it from the tests, which is great. But they don't teach you how to write your own tests. And I think that would be really helpful.
It's hard to get coding boot camps to be 100% behind it, because I think a lot do what your coding boot camp did. Like, it's important, you should do it if you have time, and it's kind of pushed to the side a little bit. But you know, like a lot of the positions that I was applying for going into my third position, like big companies, there were a lot of teams on Amazon that didn't care about tests. Like their product, it just didn't need the test coverage for the type of product that it was. And it was more profitable for the company and better for the user base to actually get these features out on time. So I have been leaning more towards kind of a test-driven way in the recent year, but I think that's kind of where it stems from is, and they probably did that with CSS. A lot of jobs just kind of have their priorities of who they're looking for and the skills that they're looking for. And I think testing tends to fall behind. But if you learn testing and you have a company that is like really focuses on test-driven development, that is a huge plus. Companies love that. So I think it's important to get some exposure with that.
With the CSS thing though, I feel like it's so important, even if you're not going to use those specific CSS skills in the job that you get, to have people look at your GitHub. They're, even if they know about code and stuff, they're not going to be that impressed with your projects if your CSS sucks. Because everybody loves, aesthetically pleasing things, even if, obviously the code is very important, but if it's awful to look at, it's, it's less inviting and it shows less of your kind of personality off behind your code and everything. And I think, when I was first getting interviews and everything, I did get complimented on the couple of things that I had on GitHub, which were very simple, but they're like, oh, I liked the design of it as well. And that kind of gave me a bit of an extra advantage. And actually the job that I have now is very CSS heavy. And if I hadn't learned Bootstrap really well in my internship, I probably wouldn't have this job. So
I'm with you on that. And I think I like that you're pushing it so hard, because we're very visual creatures. And a lot of people that come from coding boot camps, they lack the knowledge of CSS. And that's often what they're supplementing, because at the end they're working on their portfolio, trying to make it look good, trying to bring employer interest to it. And if it doesn't look good, even for backend developers, and that's been a tricky thing to convince them for. That's probably where a CSS library kind of comes into play. I think it's especially good for backend developers, but yeah, I like that you're pushing that so hard. It's a good thing. What about the instructors? Any good or bad experiences with instructors? You don't have to name names or anything, but like,
I think we can agree that Duke is the best. Everybody knows Duke's the best. It's fine. No.
Why is he the best?
I will say, my cohort ended up having 3 sort of main instructors. and a series of coaches. So Flatiron breaks it up in that way, where you have like your main instructor for the module, and then theoretically you have 2 or 3 coaches that stay with your cohort the whole time. I say theoretically because that kind of didn't happen with us. We lost almost all of our coaches. One of them went on paternity leave, and another transferred to Washington, D.C. So that was fun. But for the most part, we had until the very end, we had good coaching coverage. But the instructors were more knowledgeable and often less approachable, if that makes sense. And not that they were totally unapproachable, but it was always like, ooh, the instructor. And I called out Duke specifically because he was, I think, consistently the most enthusiastic, and also just very warm and much more approachable, in a way that some of the instructors were a little aloof, but they were good.
Awesome job, Duke. That's really cool.
I honestly don't know if I would have made it to the later modules had it not been for how wonderful of a human he was. Like, he was so like holistically supportive, and also like fostered an environment where like he encouraged people to be more vulnerable around one another, and to I remember in orientation, I don't know if you had the same experience, but they talked about like, don't be a jerk, like make it to where you can mess up in front of each other, to where you can ask questions and be vulnerable. Like, don't be a jerk to other people, because someday you're going to ask a dumb question, or you're going to like be stuck on something that might be easy to somebody else. And like, kind of, I don't know, it was very like emotionally kind of supportive as well, besides just being like technically good.
Yeah, that the more you guys talk about Duke, it reminds me of an instructor that I had that made the world of difference with getting through the program, especially during some of the hard points. So you also had coaches. Were they, just a quick question, were they full-time? Were they actual staff, or were they like graduates of Flatiron?
Both.
Okay.
So from what I understand, because we actually talked to our coaches about exactly what their position was and how that worked. The 2 main coaches that we had more or less the whole program had graduated from Flatiron the previous July. So I think it was July. But so they had graduated 3 or 4 months before we got there. But the coaching position was full-time and either a 6-month or a year-long contract.
Okay. Okay.
So they were there all day, and they were there to be the people that you go to with questions when you're in labs.
Okay, that sounds pretty typical. That's good to hear. Dominique, what about you? What do you think of your instructors?
So I had a couple different cohort leads during my time at Flatiron, and that's because I ended up repeating the 3rd module just because I wanted to understand it better the 2nd time. And then I had 2 different one-on-one, we would have weekly one-on-one meetings where your assigned instructor would, like help you out, like what's going on, all this stuff. And both of the ones that I had were great. I don't know where I would be without them. And my cohort leads were really knowledgeable, so that was great. No complaints, honestly.
Okay, that sounds really good. Sometimes it can be hit or miss with a remote program too.
It was actually we became really close in my cohort, because my cohort actually ended up having to transition to online, because it was during the last like module and a half or something, like when they started doing shelter in place and stuff, they're like, I guess you guys are remote now. So it actually brought like a weird sense of closeness and I think the the coaches worked extra hard to make sure we didn't fall behind because of the weird transition and the stress of like, having to do this in a way that none of us really expected or wanted to do that. And we're like, we didn't choose this, but they were always available for calls and stuff. They booked themselves up with calls all day to like have one-on-ones with people. So yeah, the coaches that I had were pretty, actually, I can tell this story later, but one of the coaches was actually the reason I went to Flatiron in the first place.
Really? Okay, interesting. Okay, we can definitely come back to that. How long did it, so it sounds like overall the program went really well. Curriculum was well, you gave a lot of good feedback with that. I really think the instructors make or break the program. So it's really good to hear that you had a good experience with your instructors. So when you finally graduated, how long did it take for you guys to find a job in development?
For me, it was 3 months of looking every day. And I actually did an internship before I found a job. That was unpaid. I just did it to have something on my resume. So I did that. It was actually terrible. I
Oh
didn't do
no.
anything. They didn't give me anything to do. But I guess it's fine because it was unpaid. But I got what I wanted. I got something on my resume. So that was that. And then I found my job shortly after that, actually, while I was in that internship. And then I quit and then I did my job. It was
So
pretty good.
do you feel like that unpaid internship helped you get the job?
No, not at all.
Did you put it on your resume or?
I did, but while I was doing that internship, I was actually interviewing for the company that I'm at now, and they had already seen my resume
Oh,
without that on there. So
interesting.
it actually did nothing for me, but that's
Uh,
okay.
but you have a job at the end of the day, so that's really good.
Yeah.
Okay. How about you guys? How long did it take you to get a position?
I've been talking a lot. I was trying to give other people a
No, I
chance.
appreciate that.
I
So
had actually forgotten the question, so I was waiting for
No, that's okay. I'll repeat
my
it.
process was a little weird, so I'm gonna let Andrea go first, if that's or second rather, if that's
Sure.
okay.
So the
Uh,
question was,
Oh,
how long did it
you
take?
repeated it, so
Okay.
I remember.
Okay.
No, so I was super lucky because I went to an internship fair shortly before shelter in place and everything happened, and I met this guy at 1871 who started kind of a little healthcare startup, and is like moving into the direction of telemedicine and all of this stuff. I was really excited about it, blah, blah, blah. So I ended up interviewing with him. And then after 3 days after boot camp, I started for that
Wow.
internship. And then while I was still working in the internship, I was interviewing for jobs at the same time. So it was like more or less a full-time internship. And then interviewing for jobs, and then got a job immediately. So I haven't stopped since since boot camp, which honestly for me was really good because I talked to some other people who I went to school with, and especially like with COVID and stuff and everything being very weird right now, I think a lot of people were a little down in the dumps and a little lacking
Hmm.
structure. And like a few people that I talked to, a few people that I talked to were just like, I haven't really coded much since I got out of boot camp. And I think I would have been probably in the same boat if something weren't kind of forcing me to do that. Um, so I got super lucky.
That's the big reason a lot of people don't get jobs. They just stop coding and like they take a break for a week and then they don't have that habit built up and it's hard to get back into it.
Yeah. My process was very different. So Flatiron, and I'm sure we'll cover this in more detail in a minute, but they have a whole like career services,
Okay.
career prep process for when you're finishing up the boot camp. And it's kind of intense. And especially if you end up with a career coach like mine, who is really strict about it. Like she would not approve me to set my job search start date until all of my projects had demos and full readmes and all of that, which is great. But it also meant some of my cohort mates were like starting their job search and getting to go to job fairs that I didn't get to go to yet. And
I
so
think I know who you had.
Yeah, probably. I mean, she's, you know, and all I ended up loving her, but the very beginning, it was touch and go, because she was so intense. But, you know, so I really gave myself basically all of February. I finished at the end of January and was like, cool, I'm going to use February to get all of my materials together and all my demos done and all my mock interviews done and all of that. And I declared my job search for March 23rd. I don't know if that date sounds familiar, but the city went into lockdown on March 21st.
Oh,
So
That's rough.
yeah.
That is bad timing.
So just as I'm finally like getting sent out for things and starting to apply to things in earnest, I start getting all of the responses back that are hiring freeze, sorry. And I looked at it and I talked to my husband, and also realizing this is coming from a place of immense privilege, I decided to just put it on hold. I was like, I'm not going to worry about bashing my head against this wall right now with all the stress of being locked inside. And I ended up having a veterinary emergency during all of this. And it was just too many things. So I was like, I'm putting the job search on hold. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to focus on continuing to learn and continuing to make things. And so I did a couple of like free code camp certifications, but that's when I did a bunch more CSS learning. Did some more learning on RSpec. I wrote a couple blog posts about RSpec. I built a new project for a like fencing group that I'm in. And I started contributing to open source, to a couple of different open source projects. So I kind of created my own little apprenticeship in that way, was kind of how I was looking at it. And then going into September was like, okay, things are picking back up and also calming down. We've adjusted to this normal that we're living in. I'm going to start really looking again and start applying to things. And this fellowship that I'm starting on Monday was the first thing I interviewed for.
oh my God, that's awesome.
Wow. Yeah.
So
Wow.
I was like, okay, I feel like that strategy worked out fairly well for me. But again, not everybody is in a position to be able to do that. Not everybody is in a position to be like, I can just wait and not worry about this for another 3 or 4 months.
And it's everyone has so many different stories of how they finally got their first position, but ultimately, like, the only thing that matters is that you finally, like, you followed through with what you set out to do and you finally achieved it. And I think just talking to other people, you'd be surprised at how many people would resonate with your story. And just like, even you had mentioned the emergency that came up, like sometimes, you know, a family member passes away, just something can drastically change your entire life so quickly. But I mean, the awesome thing is you figured out exactly, obviously, how to ace that first and only interview that you had. So you knocked it out of the park. Congratulations with that.
I've applied to a couple other things like before I got the offer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be kind of funny if I hear back from any of those.
Yeah, well, congrats with that. So you had mentioned like the post-job like help that you got. Did you guys have like an advisor that you guys were assigned to, and you'd maybe have weekly sessions?
Well, Andrea didn't have to do any of that.
That's true.
No, I actually had a career coach while I was doing my internship because it wasn't like full-time paid. And I also owe so many thanks to her. She was stellar. She was so validating and so wonderful. And I actually looked forward to my meetings with her every week. And she was definitely tough on me, but as tough as she was also so encouraging. I did not have the same woman that you did, but I know people that did because I've heard the same, like, very rigid. Anyway, I got very lucky with my career coach. You know, we sometimes we still call and text each other sometimes now. Like, she's fantastic. Like, I can't say better things about her. I think that's actually kind of what solidified my, like, yes, this was a good idea and this was worth every penny, because I don't, you know, there were times when I really doubted myself, and she was very good at reminding me that I'm awesome or whatever. So,
You know, I think, like you mentioned, the career coaches can really make or break your experience. They're really the last step before you finally get that position. In our coding bootcamp, it was a shame because it was such a high burnout job. There was so much turnover. Like, I felt like they cared so much about the people going through. They wanted to see them succeed, but I did feel like it was kind of a high turnover job. So it's good that your coach kind of kept up that passion and was able to connect with you.
she
Okay.
also kind of gave me, this is the last thing I'll say, like, she definitely encouraged me to be very bold in job interviews, and it gave me some advice on like questions to ask and stuff like that, that I was like, ooh, I don't know if I should do that, but then I did, and I always got calls back, and yeah, stellar.
That's really good. Okay, so did you, like, overall, kind of thinking about the curriculum and when you did move on and start talking to your career coach, kind of like start, well, I guess we've already shifted there, but how confident do you feel like you were that you were ready to become like a professional developer once you graduated? Let's actually say, like, day one after you graduated. Dominique, we're going to start with you. Sarah, I know you had another unique situation, but Dominique, you had mentioned that you had redone the third module, right? So once you did finally graduate, how comfortable were you with going into the profession?
So I actually did really well in my final project review. So I felt pretty good from that. But as a whole, I just heavy imposter syndrome, it's really common. But I just felt like, what am I doing? Like I'm not a developer. I felt like I was kidding myself. But I just kept going with it and I found a job.
All right. Awesome. How about you guys?
I definitely felt like there were some things I wanted to go more in depth on, which again, I did that. I felt pretty good about my ability to write code and, more importantly, to learn new things. What I have been feeling in thinking about starting into this industry is just the feeling of, like, I still don't feel like I know how the job works. And everybody's like, oh, you learned that. I'm like, yeah, but that's what's intimidating to me about going in and trying to get somebody to hire me, is like, you need to be able to talk about what you can contribute. And I'm like, I don't know that I know how to contribute as part of a larger team working with an existing code base. That's and it's something that none of the boot camps do, right? But it's something I wish somebody would do, is do a module or a project or something where you work with an existing code that you either have to debug or add new features to. But working with something that's already there is so much a part of many jobs, especially as an entry-level developer, that's what I really felt like I was missing. But again, ask me again in 2 weeks when I've actually started a job.
Right. I think that's...
If it makes you...
Go ahead, Andrea.
Sorry, go ahead.
You're fine. Okay. Yeah, you go.
I was just gonna say, if it makes you feel any better, I don't know. It seems like it's always in the company's best interest, though, to make sure that you know your way around the code base, because everybody started out. Everybody at that company, pretty much, I'm sure, started out where you are, so.
Yeah, I think there were so many concepts that I didn't really understand, like just agile, the whole agile process and what Scrum was. Like we did it at the coding boot camp, but I didn't really conceptualize it very well. And I feel like I was really nervous because I'm like, they're going to want to know the answers to these questions. And I do think that a good, like anyone that's hiring a junior developer, I think most companies, not all, are prepared to kind of ramp that junior developer up and understand that they're not going to understand these concepts. But it is intimidating. Doesn't make it any less intimidating for sure.
Right. Like when you're talking about how I feel about it, that's how I
Right.
feel about it. It may very well be once I've actually started my job that like, oh no, I didn't need to worry about that. And intellectually, that makes sense. But emotionally coming out of that being like, I don't know anything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I noticed, I forgot which boot camp it was, but there was a boot camp. Was it Coding Dojo? Maybe, but there was a boot camp that would transition you into kind of like an internship type position where you would touch a larger code base and kind of get accustomed to that agile process. If executed well, that sounds really good. And I'm sure that has to be revised quite a bit. But that might be an option that like some coding boot camps, especially ones like I do feel like the market's becoming oversaturated. The entry level is becoming harder and harder to get. And I do feel like that might be an option for coding boot camps in the future to give them that like actual professional experience with a large code base. That might be an option. So, all right. I think we touched on like everything I wanted to overall. And like overall, it sounds like it was a really good experience. I think we kind of touched on some of the constructive feedback that you had, but now I want to dig a little bit deeper. So now we went over the whole the experience. It was a good experience as a whole. Now let's kind of dive into like some improvements. Like if you could go back and change the way that your coding, your session, your cohort was taught, if you could change that experience to make it a better experience for you and others that would go through it, what would you change about it? Think about even the application process, the curriculum, your instructors, the post-job help. Those pretty much are the 4 categories I'd kind of focus on. And feel free to take a little bit to think about it, but what constructive feedback would you have for that?
I have one that I've got right off the top of my head, which is that I really wish they do code reviews on projects. They do, like I said, we have code challenges that are kind of like exams, and you have a code review for that. But they don't, when during project week, you have your team and you build your thing and you present the thing, you show everybody how your app that you built works, and then nothing. And I would have found it really, really helpful to have our working app code reviewed for refactoring opportunities, for like, just to see that like, okay, this thing works, but if anybody sees you do this, they're going to think you don't know what you're doing. Like, just this doesn't meet best practices for this framework or language or whatever. I think that would have been really helpful.
Okay. And did you have, or did they have other people in your cohort review your code? Did you guys review each other's code?
No.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I think that's really good feedback. Anything else at the top of your heads? Because we went over CSS. You had wished you had learned more of that. Went over, you wished when they did get feedback, it sounds like it was really good that they did get feedback. They probably should have had a stricter review on some of the things that went in. I think I'm touching on everything you guys have said so far. What about, so here's a struggle that a lot of boot camps have. When you transition from front end to back end or back end to front end, you kind of have to form a different mental model in your head. And some people have a hard time transitioning because it's just a different way of thinking. And they struggle with that transition between the two. Did you feel like the integration was good enough where you guys didn't struggle with that at all?
I felt my primary struggle with that was just JavaScript in general. And the syntax is often similar, but just different enough from Ruby. That was the real struggle I had. I didn't feel like it was a huge mental leap. Again, because we had done some front end Ruby at that point as well. So it wasn't, no, I didn't think it was a huge jump.
Okay, that's good.
I found myself wishing a lot that there, and I'm sure, you know, if it was like this, I'd be asking for more of it, but like that there was just an extra week in the boot camp, because I don't know, I sometimes I feel like I had a really hard time because I noticed that it was taking me longer to pick up the concepts than most other people. And then I was feeling kind of dumb all the time, or like I was just like a little like step behind. And if they would ramp something up super quickly, then I'd be kind of 2 or 3 steps behind. And I always managed to get there, but sometimes it was incredibly overwhelming. And sometimes I wish there was just a little more time on things. Another thing I know that hopefully they've changed it by now, or they will really soon. I hated that we were only learning class components and not hooks for React, because when I got into a job interview at one point, they were like, "Oh my God, you didn't learn hooks? I'm so sorry." Like they were they still really liked me, but like they were like, "That's awful." And I think not so much exactly curriculum related, but just kind of overall. And you're probably already going to ask this, so sorry if you were, but I think overall a critique would be that I mean, you lost a couple of coaches, we lost a couple of coaches. I think that there should be a coach for every like 4 to 6 people, and not like one coach for like 12 or 15 people.
And that's what we had at the beginning. Like at the beginning, we had 3 coaches for 11 people. And then Adam went on paternity leave and they didn't have a replacement for him. And by the time we got to our last 2 weeks, our cohorts were sharing one coach.
Yeah.
And I think you had maybe one other full-time coach, and we just had Nick sometimes.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think that's their plan ever. But I think it was just a failure of staffing density at the time.
Well, by the time it got to me, I think they weren't even planning on hiring another. And several of us were pretty unhappy about that. But
there was a whole thing with their planning and how often the cohorts were going to start. So
right. Yeah.
Interesting.
I have to assume that has been ironed out at this point, but because we were only the 3rd or 4th cohort to start in Chicago.
Oh.
They had not been in Chicago very long.
I didn't realize that.
Started.
We had the main instructor leave when I moved into the part that he taught, and there was an instructor that stepped up, and I think that's what solidified how much I really respected the staff at the coding bootcamp, because you can, like, if the instructor did step up and fill that spot, and it's a really, really hard thing to do, he was willing to be burned out and he went the extra mile with it. I think that's where I had my respect for my bootcamp, is because it changes your entire experience when you're understaffed. Like, it can really make or break a coding bootcamp experience, and it could be the difference between you getting a job and you not understanding enough to be able to get a job when you graduate. How about you, Dominique? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
This is kind of going back to maybe them not like helping you enough, but I understand that they don't want to handhold you. But sometimes it's like just give me a little something to start with, just because it's not helpful to spend hours on like, how do I run this, I don't know what I'm doing. So it's just, if they would give you just that little extra kick just to start something off, like, that'd be great.
You,
Especially at first, because like the hardest part is not having the language to even find out stuff. You're like, well, I don't know what this thing is called, and like this other thing that I need to make it work, I don't know what that's called either. So it's like then it takes a long time to research it. Yeah.
I did specifically ask that a couple times from the coaches. Like, look, I don't want you to give me the answer, but can you help point me at how I would find the answer? Which I think a couple times they were like, that, I like that. Okay. And they will almost always answer those questions. Like, yeah, try searching for this thing. Or try thinking about, how are you thinking about this? Okay, that's a good direction. This is not a great direction. That isn't going to help you very much. And so those I found them really good at that kind of problem solving.
Coding really teaches you how to Google.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dominique, I think that's. I know. Is this going to happen? It always happens with open mics, but I prefer open mics. So I think that's really, really good feedback, Dominique, because there's kind of a struggle with how much a developer should be handheld. And I don't think people have that line in the sand, because I think I think most developers, they don't want something tossed their way if they're not going to grow from it. But I think some people will build a habit of constantly asking for things if they're getting that answer right away. I think it's very easy for us to build a habit. So I get the fact that they're trying to train you to be able to be successful on a team and realize there's a certain line where you do have to ask. I think earlier, Andrea, was it you that mentioned like after 20 minutes, if you're staring at your screen? Okay, so I thought that was really, I thought that was really cool. I think 20 minutes, if you don't understand it, or if you're not like, you don't have a mental model that's further along of like what you're trying to figure out, I think that's a really good time to ask, because, and this is really important because so many developers, they don't ask. They're like, I should know this. They hired me. I don't want them to think that I can't do the job. And that's something a lot of people struggle with. My question to you, Dominique, is do you feel like after that 20 minutes, did you try to go up to them and get them to give you a little hint going forward? Or do you feel like they just rejected your request for help altogether?
For a long time, I had that ego issue where I didn't want to ask questions because I didn't want them to think I was dumb. Um, but I eventually got over that. And even my company now, I'm on a 6-person team and I have one lead developer. And he tells me, like, if you don't know something, try and figure it out for like 30 minutes and then come ask me. So that's that 20-minute thing that they taught you guys was really, that's how it is.
I like that. I definitely like that. Okay, that was good. That was a lot of good feedback. And overall, like I said, it sounds like all of you had a really good experience. I'm happy all of you got your position, and everyone's going to have a different story. So I'm glad everyone shared theirs, because I guarantee you many people resonate with each individual when they kind of watch this. So that's really good. I think that's all I had. What I actually want to do is for anyone trying to become a developer that's kind of struggling or even maybe considering a coding boot camp, do you guys have any final piece of advice for those aspiring developers?
I guess I would ask them, are you okay with feeling like you don't know what's going on? Because you'll feel that a lot and you have to sit with that feeling and you just have to work your way through it, and it's not fun. And sometimes you do want to give up, but you can't. You just have to keep going.
I like that. And I like how simple you made that too. It's really, really easy to understand.
Be excited about small victories is a big one. I had a partner on a project who every time we get something working, we'd get a feature working, and I'd be like, it works. Yay, it works. And he'd be like, I don't like the way it looks yet. It's messy. I'm like, yes, but it works. And if you have that, like, he ultimately thanked me for making him do that, because it got him out of that always feeling dragged down and never feeling like it's good enough. Start with it working and be excited about it.
We had talked about in a previous episode perfection being a weakness, and it's a very strong opinion to say, and I think it's 100% true, though. It really is.
I listened to that one and I was like, I never thought about it that way, but it's absolutely accurate. When I was falling into the perfectionist trap when I was much younger, it was very much a fear of not being good, of other people seeing that I wasn't good enough. And breaking through that, it's something I still struggle with sometimes. But once you identify it and break through it, everything's better.
Yeah.
I remember one thing that, again, Duke said was, you guys coming into this boot camp are probably all used to being the smartest kid in class. And it was super true for my boot camp, and I feel like probably like it's not an easy thing to even get in there in the first place. So it's like you're with a bunch of people who are pretty smart and pretty, a lot of people who have also changed careers and have a lot of other experience and stuff too. And he said, don't fall into the trap of comparing yourself to other people. Use, especially if somebody's better than you at something that you're learning right now, like use them as a resource and think about it as a collaboration and not a competition, which was so hard for me even up until the very end. I actually had somebody in my cohort got he and I were the last two candidates to get a job for the same company, and I found this out later. And I think it's about like, being able to celebrate other people's wins as well, and then being like, okay, well, you got this and I didn't, so help me be better at this. Yeah, and I think I guess like my piece of advice kind of for people going into it is, push yourself and then push yourself a little further, blah, 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 etc. But also don't forget to take care of your mind and don't forget to take care of your body and sleep, no matter how much you have to do. I remember there was one project that, we just hit a snag towards the end and basically had nothing to present as our final project. Like it just, something went wrong and it went super wrong. But I still got, a good 5 or 6 hours of sleep that night. I didn't stay up all night over it. And you'll regret it if you neglect those things, because you're not going to be a very good developer the next day if you haven't slept and you haven't taken care of yourself, and you will burn out if you neglect those things, for sure.
It's hard to learn when your brain is mush.
Yeah. It's harder to discover your brain's mush when it's mush.
Yeah. And I've even encountered it in my job a little bit, because I'm not in an office and I don't have the same like structure, and I will sit at the computer for 4 or 5 hours and realize for like an hour that I need to pee, and like I'm like, why am I torturing I even told one of my bosses today, I was like, I think I need to take walks more. And to hear myself say it out loud, he was like, yeah, you should. I was like, okay, cool, I have like permission and this is cool. But it's like, we're so used to kind of punishing ourselves, I feel like, especially after a boot camp, like you forget to allow yourself to breathe a little bit. And I think that's important to keep in mind.
I think that's a really good point, because not just boot camps, but a lot of different professions, we just get trained as people, as workers, we have one lunch, maybe a second mini lunch if we're lucky, and we just sit in front of our job all day. And I feel like that was a hard thing for me to discover. It took me 2 years to go on walks, like 2 years of being a professional developer, where I felt like it was okay to go on walks. And my boss had to tell me, like, get up, get off the computer. And so it's, yeah, I completely agree with you. And it made the world of difference. I even went out of my way during my first position. I actually started to get better at it, but I asked my boss, can I have a 2-hour lunch? And he asked why. And I said, because I want to work out. There's a gym right across the street. I want to take caffeine. I don't want to do it after I'm done working. I just want to refresh. And it was the best thing that I could have done. I felt so good. I wish I would have kept up that habit, but I felt so good after that workout, and I was able to go another 6 hours if I needed to. I loved it. And I feel like developers, your boss knows how easy it is for your mind to turn to mush. And people think like, oh, code for 2, 3, 4 hours. Sometimes you need to do it within an hour within the day. And you just your mind's not working. And just going out, seeing the scenery, thinking about something else, having a phone call with, family, someone you know, it changes your perspective and it gets you out of that tunnel vision. And when you come back, all of a sudden things click a little bit easier. And that's one thing that it took me so long to discover.
Yeah, 100%. And it's if you don't spend a few minutes away, it's going to take you longer to figure out that thing that you've been staring at, rather than, you're like, oh, well, I lost all of this time. It's yeah, well, you'll probably be able to focus and get things done quicker if you take a break from the screen for a moment. So
Absolutely. Okay. Those were 3 really good pieces of advice. Thanks, everyone. I think we're ready for our outros. Okay. So, well, first, I just want to, again, thank you for coming on. You guys are volunteering your time for this. And I definitely really appreciate it. I love meeting new people every single time I bring people on. If you guys ever need help with anything, you lose your position, let me know. We could talk. But happy to help you out. So, but yeah, let's jump into the outros. Sarah, you want to start?
What is an outro?
It's whatever you want it to be. I don't know. I probably should explain these things better. If people want to reach out to you or connect with you, if you'd like that, where could they reach you?
Yeah, great. You can find me on LinkedIn at slaloja on LinkedIn. I accept basically all connections. So yeah, shoot me a message if you want to chat. Perfect.
How about you, Andrea?
So I'm on LinkedIn and I think also GitHub as abardev. So A, my first letter of my first name, bar, BARR, and dev, obviously. Yeah, LinkedIn and I think GitHub, although don't contact me on GitHub because who does that?
Can you do that?
Probably.
You can follow. Yeah, you can follow people. Okay.
There's community forums and stuff, but no. But yeah, please get in touch. I love at least trying to connect people, if not, helping them out directly, because I received a lot of help from other devs, getting where I am now. So.
All right, cool. Thank you. How about you, Dominique?
You can find me on LinkedIn just by searching my name, Dominique Scaff, and that's DOMINIQUESKAF. If you shoot me a message, I'll reply as soon as I can. But yeah.
All right, perfect. Awesome. And for anyone that wants to follow me, feel free to follow my Twitter at DeveloperDonTV. I stream live, all my live coding. I'm working on a new project at twitch.tv/DonTheDeveloper. And then you will see another episode just like this the following week. And so for Sarah, Andrea, and Dominique, I will release this episode, not this coming Monday, but the following Monday. And then I make a LinkedIn post and you'll be able to see the audio file and the YouTube video. So just so you guys know. But everyone, thanks so much for joining me with this podcast. Keep giving me your feedback. Keep giving me the podcast reviews. It's actually what keeps me doing these bootcamp episodes, because I found out that a lot of people like these. A lot of people are considering boot camps, which I love to see. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't and you want to be notified when we go live or do another episode. But Sarah, Andrea, Dominique, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate having you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.